Oh man, I've had a day. This is two things. One, an educational piece on how measurements affect you, and two, my reply to Super Review in his most recent video, at least at the time of posting this. Let's get into it. I want to know right off the bat, Super Review is an excellent guy. He's super friendly, and I think he was very respectful in his video. There's some things in it that are at best bad data, and at worst, damaging and misleading to the community. Now, obviously, I don't think Super Review is ever doing something like that intentionally. Please be nice to him. This is also a textbook example of why I think measurements in audio need to change. If you don't have the background on this, I've been doing some labs work for Linus Media Group. Specifically, this is in relation to their short circuit video on the Airpods Pro 3. Every day I wake up and this is my nightmare. There's a lot of people who strongly agreed with the sentiment of that video, and there's also people who said they felt like Linus's reaction was overblown.
Unbelievable. They sound like shit. The Beats acquisition was for the brand name, not the sound signature. Fuck.
What I want to make clear is that the opinions and feelings expressed in that video also represent my own. I wrote the lab notes for that video. For the sake of transparency, these are my lab notes for that video, directly screenshotted from the document. And I had more to say on set. Now, I may not be as animated of a presenter when it comes to on-camera presentation, but let's also look at my history. I put some IEMs in a garbage disposal. I described some headphones recently as e-waste destined for a landfill. This is e-waste, designed to be put in a landfill. That's the whole video. Peace. I published a video once that was just sitting in silence for 10 minutes being disappointed in a headphone and never commenting on it. And I also often make comments like this. Sweet merciful Christ, in a handbasket that's a lot of bass. Why? Why is that? Just let me adjust the one problematic frequency for the love of God. What the f is going on in the treble? So I don't feel like that reaction is overblown, or honestly out of my character either. It's really frustrating when you have a product like the AirPods Pro 2 that is really decent. It is a little bit V-shaped, but it is really decent. And then to have Apple make some big changes that are honestly not that good. Some people will be okay with this, and that's what we're gonna get into in part of this video. But for the most part, the average person is probably going to perceive this as being pretty V-shaped and pretty bright. Let's talk about the measurements first. We should not be using raw measurements in this hobby anymore. They are not useful. These are the measurements displayed in Super Review's video. This is a semi-raw measurement. It is a raw measurement that's being compensated to IEF comp. Now, this is a comp that is part of a delta, and it's to try and bring his rig more in line with some others. It doesn't exactly work like that. And then a preference target overlaid raw against a semi-raw measurement. This is like a mashup of my nightmares. So 7-Eleven rigs, break it down real fast. Because we are bypassing the pinna, and we are putting an IEM directly in the ear canal, we are essentially going to have to not just compensate for the response of the head, but we need to accommodate what could this be like for the population average pinna, the average person's ear that we're bypassing since we're just in the canal. And that's how you end up with things like JM1. This is the JM1 raw response for 7-Eleven. This is what we should be accommodating for, because this is how the average person is going to perceive what they are hearing with that IEM in their ear canal. That doesn't mean it should be the target. Over that, you can overlay your preference target, but you should be compensating your measurements to the population average. Here's a pickup shot because there's something that I just wanted to reword how I was saying it. If I was to look at one of your graphs here between the AirPods Pro 3 and this Dunu, you'd think these are actually pretty similar. They are similarly measuring on a 7-Eleven coupler. But what about when we look at them on a 5128, something that has the correct canal impedance for IEMs? That's pretty different. The Super 22 preference target is trying to accommodate for the low-end changes that a 7-Eleven ear sim is making versus something like a 5128. But AirPods Pro 3 are already compensating for that change actively. The result is that the measurement that you're getting is not going to represent how it actually sounds when it's in a person's ear. And that is problematic. This sort of a compensation really would only work when you were using a passive wired IEM comparing to other passive wired IEMs, and even then it's only going to work for your specific preference target on your specific rig. The lack of that data's ability to translate to anything else at all, its limited use case, and the fact that we straight up can't and shouldn't be using it for active devices that will compensate for canal impedance doesn't really make it good for this application. And again, it makes the results that we get from it basically inapplicable and certainly not representative. This data is essentially useless. We have no reference point for the ear that it's being measured on, let alone the average ear. All we have is preference targets. There's a whole other thing about using 711 measurements for IEMs when 5128 data is available. That is probably a discussion for another day, going into why acoustic impedance matters, especially for IEMs. But you did one other thing, brother, that I really just cannot abide by, and it is this. When saying that Airpods Pro 3 are nothing like Beats, you showed a raw measurement, not naming what type of rig it is on, with no target and no compensation. This is 100% useless data. And I say that with all the love in the world because, again, I like your channel, Mr. Super. But let's take a look at things when they've been standardized. In a perfect world, we would be able to show measurements like HRTF, where we have the IEM itself and then a range of how it performs from person to person varied. Now, while we can do that with headphones, it's not really easy to do with IEMs yet. But what I can show you is what the AirPods Pro 3 primed at 50% volume measure relative to the population average ear, which is this measurement right here. Behind that, we have the preference bounds, which is the range based on the Harman research of kind of the upper and lower extent of what people tend to prefer. Somewhere in the middle is closer to ideal and will be what people perceive as neutral. Based off that, I think it's very easy to say this is an obviously V-shaped product. There is an area that bumps out in the kind of lower mid-range, but for the most part, this is a V-shaped product, and in some areas it goes as far as 7 decibels more treble. That's very significant. It's a very loud difference. And I would like to reiterate Linus's statement about taking the Beats tuning. These are V-shaped. In fact, in some cases more V-shaped than Beats in-ears, especially when we compare them to the response of the population average ear. I keep saying that word too, population average ear. I'm going to circle back to that and explain more about that in the latter half of this video. You should stick around and watch that before you comment because it's highly relevant to this discussion. Let's talk about these Beats measurements though real quick. This is the AirPods Pro 3, compensated the population average ear on the Care 5128, and then that is compared to the Beats Studio Buds. These are both V-shaped IEMs. They are both similarly V-shaped IEMs. The AirPods Pros have a little bit more low mid-range. The Beats have a little bit more upper mid-range, but as far as the treble goes, the AirPods Pro 3 have more treble and the same amount of bass. It's a V-shaped IEM. Here's another example. This is the AirPods Pro 3, and then the Power Beats Pro 2. Again, both of these are compensated at the population average ear on the Care 5128, and the Power Beats Pro 2 is actually measuring as more neutral than the AirPods Pro 3. Now, they do both get pretty peaky around like 7-8 kilohertz. I think it's about 8 kilohertz. But for the most part, the AirPods Pro 3, they have more elevated upper treble and bass. They're V-shaped. It's the Beats sound signature, with the main difference being that in the Beats sound signatures, we seem to be getting a bit more elevation between 1 and 2 kilohertz, but it's staying within the bounds. If anything, the irony of that is that means that the Beats are probably more upper mid-range focused than the AirPods Pros are. Now, the population average person will likely perceive this as pretty bright, but not everyone is the population average person. That's something I want to talk about next. This is an article that I wrote in collaboration with Labs, and it's really worth reading. You should read it if you get a chance. I'll put in the link in the video description. This is essentially an article on why raw measurements are really suboptimal, and also other things that we should be accommodating for in measurements that we simply can't do with raw measurements, like how things are going to vary from person to person, how HRTF measurements are done for over-ears. Here's the example in the article, which is the frequency response for the over-ear headphone, the Nothing Headphone 1. And as you can see, this kind of pinkish range here, right, salmon, is that salmon colored? Here's the color code. This range is a range of how this headphone might respond differently from person to person. You are probably somewhere within that ribbon. The same can be done for IEMs. It's not being implemented a lot yet, but it can be done. This graph is sort of an aggregation of data from a bunch of different research papers, and these are all different people's HRTFs. As you can see, there's a fair bit of variation there. There's like 5+ dB, around 4 kilohertz of variation. The average of that is something like what we're going for compensating these measurements, but a lot of people will still experience things above and below that. The thing is that with no reference point, we don't know where the middle is. We don't know where the average is. That's why we need to compensate to the average. So we have a reference point. We can say, well, above this and below this is where some people are going to experience it, but the average is somewhere in the middle. That means for people like Super Review or some others, this might not be very bright to them because of where their HRTF sits on this table. But for others, it might be twice as bright as average. It might be more than twice as bright as average. There are going to be people on the extremes of both sides of this, and that's again why it's important to have a reference point. Data without a reference point, data without anything to compare to that is concrete that we can actually use to translate to our listening experience is useless. And it is about time that we change that. So again, go through, read this article, watch Super Review's video, but this video is my call for standardization. Reviewers, use all the preference targets you want, but start compensating your measurements to the response of the ear you're using to measure things. If it's a 5128, use 5128 DF. If it's a clone rig, use the DF for that clone rig. If it's for an IEM on 711, use JM1711 or JM15128 if it's on a 5128. Compensate your results to a standard that we can universally apply to any measurement rig to translate things to the population average ears, and then overlay your preferences over that. Then anyone can go to any reviewer, any publication, look at a graph and understand not only what this is going to be like for the average person, but also what your preferences as a reviewer are like. Because if I look at just a raw target over a raw measurement, it doesn't tell me much about what you're going for. We need a real reference point. And even more so, it's tough because lots of publications use different scales for publishing measurements, which is why I would also like to standardize 25 decibels per decade. This is a completely reasonable scale ratio. You can still add as much on top and below as you want in the data set, but the actual vertical scale of the data will be set. These two things are extremely important, and more of us should be paying attention to it. And honestly, this industry would be a lot better off if we did. Not for the sake of saying, well, measurements say this is good and this is bad, but for measurements being able to translate to this is how the average person is going to experience this, and then some more and some less. If you are a reviewer and you want any of this data, I'm happy to provide it. But a lot of this is also publicly available. Sources and links will be in the video description for all of this. If you want to go check out the research papers or the sources that I'm using for this information, you can check all of it out down there. And again, I want to note, Super Review, I think he's an excellent addition to the community. I think that he makes quality content, and I like a lot of the ways that he does things. But I don't agree with him on this, and that's okay. And in my personal opinion, having a standardized format for data, especially one that's going to better accommodate for the average person and accommodate for our hearing differences between you and me, is going to make that open floor for discussion a lot more productive for the community as a whole. And at the end of the day, I think that's what most of us want, is a better audio community. I think I'm going to wrap this video up. Guys, if you liked it, please leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, help support the channel, you can at the float plane, the link in the video description. I post early access to reviews over on there. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Until next one, guys. Peace.